Sarah Martinez walked into the mess hall with her head down, carrying her lunch tray like it weighed 100 pounds. The noise hit her first, hundreds of military trainees talking, laughing, and eating together. She found an empty table in the corner and sat down quietly, hoping nobody would notice her. But someone did notice. Marcus Thompson, a big guy from Texas who thought he was the toughest trainee in the program, nudged his friend Jake. "Look at the new girl," he whispered. She looked scared of her own shadow. Sarah had joined the naval training program just 2 weeks ago. She was small, maybe 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore the same uniform as everyone else. But somehow, she looked different. Quieter, weaker, some thought. The truth was, Sarah was different. Very different. But not in the way these trainees imagined. Marcus stood up from his table, and 14 of his friends followed him. They were all big, strong guys who had been training together for months. They thought they were the best fighters in the program. They walked over to Sarah's table like a pack of wolves. "Hey there, little mouse," Marcus said, sitting down across from her without being invited. "You lost or something? The kids' camp is down the road." Sarah looked up slowly. Her brown eyes were calm, almost peaceful. "I'm just eating my lunch," she said softly. Jake laughed. "Did you hear that, boys? She's just eating her lunch." The other trainees gathered around the table, forming a circle around Sarah. She was completely surrounded now, with no easy way out. "Maybe we should help her finish faster," another trainee named Derek suggested. He reached over and grabbed Sarah's apple from her tray. "You probably don't need all this food anyway. You're so tiny." Sarah watched him take her apple, but she didn't say anything. She just kept eating her sandwich, one small bite at a time. This made the boys even angrier. They wanted a reaction. They wanted her to cry, or beg, or run away. "Are you deaf?" Marcus asked, leaning closer. "We're talking to you. I can hear you just fine," Sarah replied, still in that same quiet voice. She took another bite of her sandwich. The mess hall was getting quieter now. Other trainees were starting to notice what was happening. Some felt bad for the small girl, but nobody wanted to get involved. These 15 guys were known as troublemakers, and most people stayed away from them. Marcus was getting frustrated. This girl wasn't acting scared like he expected. She was just calm. Too calm. It made him feel stupid, and that made him angry. "Stand up," he ordered. "We're not done talking to you." Sarah looked around the table at all 15 faces staring down at her. They were all much bigger than her. Most of them had been training for months and thought they were tough fighters. They probably outweighed her by 60 or 70 pounds each. She finished the last bite of her sandwich and wiped her mouth with a napkin. Then she stood up slowly, like she had all the time in the world. "What did you want to talk about?" she asked. Marcus smiled, thinking he had won. "We want to know what a little girl like you is doing in a place like this. This is military training, not summer camp." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. This is military training." She looked each of them in the eye, one by one. "And I'm here to train." "Train for what?" Derek laughed. "To serve cookies?" Something changed in Sarah's eyes then. Just for a second. They became very hard and very cold. But it happened so fast that most of the boys didn't even notice. "I train for the same thing you do," she said quietly. "To serve my country." Marcus reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. Not gently, roughly, like he was trying to push her back into her chair. "Listen, sweetheart. On they hiv. On they hiv." That's when everything changed. Sarah's hand moved faster than anyone could see. One moment, Marcus was reaching for her shoulder, and the next moment he was bent over the table with his arm twisted behind his back. His face pressed against her lunch tray. The mess hall went completely silent. "Don't touch me again," Sarah said in the same quiet voice she had used all along. But now there was something else in her tone. Something that made every person in that room understand that she was not joking around. Marcus tried to pull away, but he couldn't move. Sarah's grip was like iron, and she knew exactly how to hold him so that any movement would cause serious pain. "Let me go," he gasped. Sarah looked at the 14 other trainees who were still standing around the table. They looked shocked and confused. A few seconds ago, they had been in control. Now their leader was helpless, held down by a girl who was half his size. "I think," Sarah said calmly, "that we need to have a different kind of conversation." Sarah released Marcus and stepped back, but she stayed ready. The 15 trainees looked at each other with confusion and anger. Marcus rubbed his sore arm and glared at her with red, embarrassed cheeks. "You got lucky," he said, trying to sound tough even though his voice was shaking. "That won't happen again." Jake stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Yeah, we weren't ready for you to fight dirty like that." Sarah almost smiled. "Fighting dirty? I just used basic defensive techniques. They teach that stuff in week 1 of most military programs." "Shut up," Derek said. He was angry now. Really angry. "You think you're so smart? Let's see how smart you are when all of us come at you together." The other trainees in the mess hall were watching now, but still nobody moved to help. Some pulled out their phones to record what might happen next. Others just stared in shock. Sarah looked around at the 15 angry faces surrounding her. She could see that they were past the point of backing down. Their pride was hurt, and they needed to prove themselves. She understood this kind of thinking. She had seen it many times before. "Are you sure that's what you want to do?" she asked quietly. "Real sure," Marcus said, still rubbing his arm. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Now I'm going to return the favor." Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay. But before we do this, I want to tell you something important." "We don't want to hear your excuses," Jake said. "It's not an excuse," Sarah replied. "It's a warning." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wallet. From it, she took out an ID card and placed it on the table where everyone could see it. Marcus leaned forward to read it, and his face went white. The card was black with gold letters. At the top, it said, "United States Navy." Below that was Sarah's photo, looking serious and professional. And at the bottom, in bold letters that seemed to glow under the mess hall lights, were the words that changed everything. "Special Warfare Operator, Navy SEAL." "That's impossible," Jake whispered. "Girls can't be SEALs." Sarah picked up the card and put it back in her wallet. "Actually, the first women graduated from SEAL training 3 years ago. I was in the 2nd class, to include female operators." Derek shook his head. "You're lying. That's a fake card." "Why would I lie?" Sarah asked. "What would be the point?" Marcus was staring at her now, really looking at her for the first time. He noticed things he had missed before. The way she stood, perfectly balanced on the balls of her feet. The way her eyes never stopped moving, always watching everything around her. The scars on her hands that came from years of hard training. "If you're really a SEAL," he said slowly, "then what are you doing here? This is just basic military training." Sarah sat back down at her table. "I'm here because I'm instructing a special warfare preparation course. I'm supposed to observe different training programs to see how we can improve them." She looked up at the 15 trainees who were still standing around her. "I've been watching all of you for 2 weeks, taking notes on your behavior, your teamwork, your leadership skills." Jake's mouth fell open. "You've been spying on us?" "I've been evaluating you," Sarah corrected. "And right now, I'm writing a report that will go to your commanding officers about how you handle conflict and treat your fellow service members." The trainees looked at each other nervously. They were starting to realize that they had made a very big mistake. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair. "We didn't know," he said weakly. "Would it have mattered if you did know?" Sarah asked. "Would you have treated me differently just because of my rank?" She opened her notebook and wrote something down. "Because that tells me a lot about what kind of soldiers you're going to be." Derek was getting desperate now. He couldn't accept that this small, quiet girl was actually one of the most elite warriors in the American military. "Prove it," he said loudly. "If you're really a Navy SEAL, Prove it right now. Sarah looked up from her notebook. How would you like me to prove it? Fight us, Derek said. All of us. If you're really as tough as you say you are, you should be able to handle 15 regular trainees, right? The mess hall got very quiet again. Everyone was watching to see what Sarah would do. She closed her notebook and stood up slowly. You really want me to do that? Yeah, Derek said, and his friends nodded in agreement. They were too proud to back down now. Even though some of them were starting to have doubts, Sarah looked around the mess hall. There are too many people here. Someone could get hurt by accident. Are you scared? Marcus asked, trying to sound confident. Sarah almost laughed. I'm not scared of you. I'm worried about you. There's a difference. She picked up her lunch tray and walked over to return it. The 15 trainees followed her, still surrounding her like a pack of hunting dogs. The training yard behind Building C is empty right now, Sarah said as she put her tray away. If you really want to do this, we can go there. Jake nodded eagerly. Perfect. Let's go. As they walked toward the door, Sarah pulled out her phone and sent a quick text message to someone. She put the phone away before anyone could see what she had written. What was that? Marcus asked suspiciously. Nothing important, Sarah said. But she was smiling now, and that smile worried some of the smarter trainees. They had no idea what they were walking into. The training yard behind Building C was a large, flat area covered with mats where soldiers practiced hand-to-hand combat. It was surrounded by a chain-link fence and had bleachers on one side for people to watch training exercises. As Sarah and the 15 trainees walked across the yard, word spread quickly through the base. Other soldiers started gathering at the fence to watch what was about to happen. Nobody wanted to miss this. Sarah walked to the center of the mat area and turned to face the group of trainees. They spread out around her in a circle, just like they had done in the mess hall. But now there was more space, and they felt more confident. Last chance to change your minds, Sarah said calmly. We can walk away right now, and I'll pretend this never happened. Marcus shook his head. No way. You wanted to prove you're tough? Prove it. Sarah looked around at all the faces staring at her. Some of them looked excited. Some looked nervous. A few looked like they were starting to understand that they had made a serious mistake. Okay, she said. But we need to set some rules first. Derek laughed. Rules? This isn't a game, lady. Everything is a game until someone gets hurt, Sarah replied. And I don't want anyone to get seriously injured. She pointed to Marcus. No hits to the head or neck. No kicks to the knees. No eye strikes. We're here to settle an argument. Not to send people to the hospital. Jake nodded reluctantly. Fine. Same rules apply to you. Sarah almost smiled again. I wasn't planning to hurt any of you badly. But I appreciate you pointing that out. The crowd around the fence was getting bigger now. Someone had brought a camera and was setting it up to record everything. Sarah noticed this but didn't say anything about it. Are you ready? Marcus asked. Sarah took off her jacket and folded it neatly, placing it on a nearby bench. Underneath, she wore a simple gray t-shirt that showed her muscled arms. The trainees could see now that she was much stronger than she looked. I'm ready, she said. Marcus gave a signal, and all 15 trainees rushed toward her at once. What happened next was like watching a dance. Sarah moved in ways that seemed impossible. As the first trainee reached her, she stepped aside smoothly and used his own momentum to send him tumbling across the mat. The second one swung a punch at her, but she caught his wrist and twisted it gently until he had to drop to his knees. 2 more trainees grabbed for her arms, but she spun between them like water flowing around rocks. Somehow, they ended up grabbing each other instead of her, and they crashed into the ground in a confused heap. Sarah never stopped moving. She flowed from one opponent to the next, like she could see the future. Every time someone tried to hit her, she was already somewhere else. Every time someone tried to grab her, they found themselves being thrown or spun around until they lost their balance. The crowd watching from the fence was completely silent. They had never seen anything like this before. Marcus came at her from behind, thinking he could surprise her. But Sarah seemed to have eyes in the back of her head. She ducked under his reaching arms and swept his legs, sending him sliding across the mat on his back. Jake tried to tackle her around the waist, but she stepped aside and guided him past her with one hand. He ran headfirst into the fence with a loud crash. One by one, the trainees found themselves on the ground, out of breath, confused, and completely outmatched. Sarah moved through them like they were standing still. She never seemed to hurry, never seemed to use much effort, but somehow, they couldn't touch her. Derek was the last one standing. He had been hanging back, watching his friends get embarrassed, trying to figure out some way to win. Now it was just him and Sarah, facing each other in the middle of the mat. "Give up," he said desperately. "You can't fight all of us forever." Sarah looked around at the 14 other trainees who were sitting on the ground, rubbing their bruises and staring at her in amazement. "I think I already did," she said quietly. Derek charged at her with a loud yell, putting all his strength into one final attack. Sarah waited until the last possible second, then stepped aside and helped him along with a gentle push. He flew past her and crashed into the bleachers with a sound like thunder. The training yard was completely quiet, except for the heavy breathing of 15 exhausted and defeated trainees. Sarah walked over to her jacket and put it back on. She wasn't even breathing hard. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, looking around at the group. "Anyone need medical attention?" Marcus struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and exhaustion. "How?" he gasped. "How did you do that? How did you do that?" Sarah picked up her notebook and wrote something in it. Years of training, thousands of hours of practice, and a lot of very good teachers. She looked up at him. "The same training that's available to any of you, if you're willing to work hard enough for it." Jake was leaning against the fence, trying to catch his breath. "We're sorry," he said quietly. "We didn't know who you were." "But you should have known better anyway," Sarah replied. "You should have treated me with respect, because I'm a fellow service member, not because of my rank or my training." She closed her notebook and started walking toward the gate. "You all have potential, but you need to learn that being strong doesn't mean picking on people who seem weaker than you." As she reached the gate, she turned back to look at the 15 trainees one more time. "Your real test isn't how well you can fight," she said. "It's how well you can work together, protect each other, and serve something bigger than yourselves." The crowd around the fence started to break up, but people were talking excitedly about what they had just seen. Word of what happened was going to spread through the entire base within hours. Sarah walked away, leaving 15 very thoughtful and very humble young soldiers sitting on the training mats, wondering how their day had gone so wrong. 2 hours later, Marcus sat in his barracks room staring at the ceiling. His whole body ached from being thrown around like a rag doll, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the shame burning in his chest. His roommate Tyler came in and sat on the opposite bunk. "Dude, everyone's talking about what happened in the training yard. Is it true? Did that small girl really beat up all 15 of you guys?" Marcus groaned and covered his face with his hands. "It wasn't even close, man. We couldn't even touch her. It was like trying to fight smoke." "But how is that possible?" Tyler asked. "She's so tiny." "Because she's not just some random trainee," Marcus said miserably. "She's a Navy SEAL, a real one." Tyler's eyes went wide. "No way. You're joking." "I wish I was," Marcus said. He sat up and looked at his friend. "We messed up, Tyler. We messed up really bad." Meanwhile, in the base commander's office, Colonel Roberts was reading a very interesting report that had just landed on his desk. It was from Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, and it was about the behavior of certain trainees in the dining facility. Colonel Roberts had known Sarah was on the base. He had personally requested her to evaluate their training programs and identify ways to improve them. What he hadn't expected was for her to become involved in an incident like this. He picked up his phone and dialed her number. "Lieutenant Martinez? This is Colonel Roberts. Could you come to my office, please? We need to discuss your report." 15 minutes later, Sarah knocked on his door and entered when he called for her to come in. She stood at attention until he gestured for her to sit down. "At ease, Lieutenant," he said. "I've read your preliminary report about the incident in the mess hall." "Quite interesting reading," Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir. I thought you should know about it as soon as possible." Colonel Roberts leaned back in his chair. Tell me what happened after you left the mess hall. I'm hearing some very unusual stories. Sarah gave him a complete account of everything that had happened in the training yard. She spoke clearly and professionally, like she was giving any other military report. When she finished, Colonel Roberts was quiet for a long moment. 15 trainees, he said finally, all at once. Yes, sir. Though I should mention that they're not bad fighters, they just lack discipline and teamwork. With proper guidance, most of them could become excellent soldiers. The colonel raised an eyebrow. You're recommending them for continued training? After they ganged up on you in the mess hall? Sarah thought about this carefully. Sir, I think they learned something important today. Sometimes the best lessons come from making mistakes and facing the consequences. And what lesson do you think they learned? That strength isn't about picking on people who seem weaker than you. And that assumptions can be very dangerous in military situations. Colonel Roberts smiled. Very diplomatic, Lieutenant. But what do you really think should happen to them? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I think they should get a second chance, sir. But with conditions. What kind of conditions? Extra training, community service. And maybe some time working with people who are actually vulnerable, so they can learn what it really means to protect others, instead of bullying them. The colonel nodded approvingly. That sounds like a reasonable approach. I'll arrange for them to spend the next month working in the base hospital, helping wounded veterans with their rehabilitation. He paused and looked at Sarah thoughtfully. You know, Lieutenant, most officers would have had those trainees disciplined severely for what they did. Some would have recommended they be kicked out of the program entirely. Yes, sir, I know, Sarah said. But kicking them out wouldn't teach them anything. It would just send them back into the world with the same attitudes they had before. And you think they can change? Sarah nodded. I've seen it happen before, sir. Sometimes the people who make the biggest mistakes early on become the best soldiers later, because they learned from those mistakes. That evening, Marcus was walking across the base when he saw Sarah sitting on a bench outside the library, reading a book. He almost kept walking, but something made him stop. He stood there for several minutes, trying to work up the courage to approach her. Finally, he took a deep breath and walked over. Ma'am? He said quietly. Sarah looked up from her book. Yes? I wanted to apologize, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. For what we did in the mess hall. And for challenging you to fight us. It was wrong. Sarah closed her book and looked at him thoughtfully. What was wrong about it? Marcus was surprised by the question. Well, everything. We surrounded you. We were rude to you. We tried to intimidate you. And. Marcus struggled to find the right words. And we did it because we thought you were weak. Because you're small and quiet, and we assumed you couldn't defend yourself. Sarah nodded. Go on. We should have treated you with respect from the beginning. Not because you're a SEAL, but because you're a person. Because you're our fellow soldier. That's right, Sarah said softly. Now, what are you going to do differently? Marcus looked down at his hands. I don't know. Try to be better, I guess. Sarah smiled for the first time since he had known her. That's a good start. But trying isn't enough. You need a plan. She opened her book again, but before she started reading, she looked back at him. Marcus, right? Yes, ma'am. You have leadership potential. I could see it even when you were making poor choices. But a real leader protects people who need protection. A real leader brings out the best in others, instead of picking on them. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Hope, maybe. How do I learn to do that? He asked. Sarah smiled again. The same way you learn anything else. Practice. And I have a feeling you're going to get plenty of practice very soon. The next morning, Marcus and the other 14 trainees received orders to report to the base hospital at 0600 hours. They had no idea what to expect, but they knew it was connected to what had happened the day before. When they arrived, they were met by Sergeant Williams, a tough-looking woman with kind eyes, who ran the hospital's rehabilitation program. Gentlemen, she said, looking at each of them seriously, You're here because someone believes you can be better than you showed yesterday. I'm not so sure about that yet. But I'm willing to give you a chance to prove it. She led them through the hospital corridors, past rooms full of wounded veterans who were working to recover from injuries they had received in combat. For the next month, Sergeant Williams continued, you'll be working here every morning before your regular training. You'll help these veterans with their physical therapy, their daily activities, and whatever else they need. Jake looked around nervously. But we don't know anything about medical stuff. You don't need to know medical stuff, the sergeant replied. You need to know how to be patient, helpful, and respectful. Think you can handle that? Marcus nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. We can handle it. Sergeant Williams stopped in front of a room where a man in his 30s was struggling to walk with the help of parallel bars. His left leg had been badly injured, and every step looked painful and difficult. This is Corporal Johnson, she said. He lost his leg in an explosion while serving overseas. He's learning to walk again with a prosthetic. The trainees watched as Corporal Johnson took one careful step, then another. Sweat was running down his face from the effort, but he didn't give up. Your job, Sergeant Williams said, is to encourage people like Corporal Johnson. To help them stay motivated when the work gets hard. To remind them that they're not alone. She assigned each trainee to work with different patients. Marcus was paired with Corporal Johnson, which made him nervous. What could he possibly say to someone who had sacrificed so much for their country? Don't worry, Corporal Johnson said with a smile when Marcus introduced himself. I don't bite. Much. Marcus laughed nervously. I'm sorry, sir. I'm just not sure how to help. Just talk to me, the corporal said, gripping the parallel bars and preparing to take another step. Tell me about yourself. What brought you to military training? As Marcus helped steady the parallel bars and talked about his dreams of becoming a good soldier, he began to understand something important. Corporal Johnson wasn't asking for pity or special treatment. He just wanted to be treated like a normal person. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and the other trainees began to change. Working with the wounded veterans taught them things that no classroom or training exercise could. They learned patience from watching people struggle through painful rehabilitation exercises without complaining. They learned courage from meeting soldiers who had lost arms or legs, but were determined to live full, productive lives. They learned humility from seeing how much these veterans had sacrificed for their country. Derek, who had been the most aggressive of the group, was assigned to work with a veteran who had lost his sight in an explosion. At first, Derek felt awkward and didn't know what to say, but gradually, he learned to describe the world around them as they walked through the hospital corridors together. You know, the blind veteran told him one day, you have a good voice for this. Very calm and detailed. You'd make a good forward observer. Derek had never thought of himself as calm before, but working with someone who truly needed his help was bringing out a different side of his personality. Jake was working with a group of veterans who were learning to use wheelchairs. He discovered that many of them were incredible athletes who could move faster and more skillfully in their chairs than he could run on his own legs. The key, one veteran explained as he spun his wheelchair in a perfect circle, is not focusing on what you can't do. You focus on what you can do, and you get really good at it. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her evaluation of the base's training programs. But now she was also watching the 15 trainees who had confronted her, observing how they were changing through their work at the hospital. She was impressed by what she saw. Marcus had become gentler and more thoughtful. Derek was learning to control his aggressive impulses. Jake was discovering that strength could be used to help people instead of intimidating them. After 2 weeks, Colonel Roberts called Sarah back to his office. I've been getting reports from Sergeant Williams about your 15 troublemakers, he said. Apparently, they're doing excellent work at the hospital. Sarah nodded. I'm not surprised, sir. They just needed to understand what real strength looks like. The veterans love them. The colonel continued. Especially that Marcus kid. Corporal Johnson says Marcus has helped him make more progress in 2 weeks than he made in the previous month. Marcus has natural leadership abilities, Sarah said. He just needed to learn how to use them properly. Colonel Roberts leaned forward. I have a proposal for you, Lieutenant. How would you feel about extending your time here to run a special leadership development program? We could use your expertise to help identify and train future leaders among our trainees. Sarah considered this carefully. What kind of program did you have in mind, sir? Something that combines traditional military training with the kind of character development these boys are getting at the hospital. Real leadership training, not just tactical skills. Sarah smiled. I think that sounds like an excellent idea, sir. That afternoon, she found Marcus at the hospital, helping Corporal Johnson practice walking up and down stairs. The improvement in both men was obvious. The corporal was moving with much more confidence, and Marcus had developed the patient, encouraging attitude of a natural teacher. Marcus, she called as they finished their session. He walked over to her, and she was struck by how much he had changed. The arrogant, aggressive young man from the mess hall was gone, replaced by someone who was thoughtful and mature. Yes, ma'am, I'm going to be staying on the base for a few more months, she said. I'm developing a new leadership program, and I'd like you to be one of the first participants. Marcus's eyes lit up. Really? You think I could be a leader? Sarah nodded. I think you already are one, Marcus. You just needed to learn what real leadership looks like. 6 months later, the base was buzzing with excitement. Today was graduation day for the first class of the new Leadership Excellence program that Sarah had developed. Families, officers, and fellow trainees had gathered to watch the ceremony. Marcus stood with 19 other trainees who had completed the program. All 15 of the original troublemakers were there, along with 5 other soldiers who had been selected for their potential. They looked proud and confident, but in a completely different way than before. Colonel Roberts stepped up to the podium to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, 6 months ago, we started something new here. We asked ourselves a simple question. What makes a real leader? Not just someone who can give orders, but someone who brings out the best in others. He gestured toward the graduating class. These 20 young men and women have spent the last 6 months learning that leadership isn't about being the toughest or the loudest. It's about service, sacrifice, and lifting others up. Sarah watched from the side of the stage as the colonel spoke. She felt proud of how much the trainees had accomplished, but she was especially proud of how they had changed as people. Marcus had become the unofficial leader of the group, not because he demanded respect, but because he earned it by helping others succeed. Derek had learned to channel his aggressive energy into protecting and defending people who needed help. Jake had discovered that his natural friendliness made him excellent at bringing diverse groups of people together. The graduates of this program, Colonel Roberts continued, have spent time working with wounded veterans, mentoring younger trainees, and completing community service projects. They've learned that true strength comes from making others stronger. He called each graduate forward to receive their certificate. When Marcus's name was called, the applause was especially loud. Corporal Johnson was in the front row, walking without assistance for the first time since his injury. He stood and cheered as Marcus crossed the stage. After the ceremony, there was a reception where graduates could talk with their families and friends. Sarah was standing near the refreshment table when Marcus approached her. Lieutenant Martinez, he said, I wanted to thank you. Thank me for what? She asked. For not giving up on us, Marcus said. Most people would have just punished us and moved on. But you saw something in us that we didn't see in ourselves. Sarah smiled. I didn't do anything special, Marcus. I just gave you a chance to become who you really are. Derek and Jake joined them, along with several other graduates. So what's next for you, ma'am? Derek asked. Are you going back to regular SEAL operations? Sarah nodded. I am. But I'll be back to check on the program and work with the next class of trainees. We'll miss having you here, Jake said. You changed everything for us. No, Sarah replied. You changed everything for yourselves. I just pointed you in the right direction. Corporal Johnson walked over, moving smoothly and confidently on his prosthetic leg. Marcus, my friend, he said with a big smile.